the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, author of the Cannabis Business Book, and you're listening to the Cannabis Business Coach podcast, where I chat with and coach the highest performing entrepreneurs in the cannabis industry.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is the Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z here, aka Professor Z, and I'm so excited about our guest for this episode. We have Penelope Nam-Stephen, who's the CEO of the travel agency's Fifth Avenue and Soho stores. And for those who don't know, the travel agency is the hottest dispensary in New York City. They're one of the best, doing great numbers. We won't go into that though. In addition to that, Penelope is also a professor at what I think, and I'm biased, is one of the greatest cannabis education programs in the world at LIM College, where she teaches a couple of classes. And I'm just so delighted to have you on the show, Penelope, because you bring a wealth of knowledge, and I always learn something whenever we chat. So I'm excited to be able to share your insights and wisdom here. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So to start, I always love to ask people about their origin, and I'm curious, how and why did you enter the legal cannabis industry?
So I spent most of my career in the fashion industry. That's what I did for my entire life before I got into cannabis. And I did very varied positions, all relating back to merchandising and buying and creating products and seeing them through the whole business cycle. So I found myself what I thought was temporarily in Massachusetts in 2018, where things were just starting to heat up. Massachusetts had passed the law to legalize adult use cannabis in the state. And I just happened to be at the right place in the right time and was looking to expand a little bit. And cannabis was something that I had always felt passionate about, but never dreamed that it could be an actual legitimate career in a business setting. So when I found out that this was actually a viable opportunity and it happened to be at the right place at the right time, I was thrilled and jumped at it.
I'm curious because I know a little bit about your background in fashion, and you've worked for, some of the most well-known luxury brands in the world. And so I'm curious, how was your experience going from, high-end luxury to cannabis, which I'm guessing at that time, maybe there were a couple, well, I'm not guessing. I can think back and remember that time actually when there were, there have always been some brands that are trying to position themselves as premium or luxury or whatnot, but I'm just curious how that transition felt for you at that time, and how cannabis compared to, what you had previously been used to and known in the fashion space.
When I first got into the cannabis industry, it was not as fully developed as it is now. So rewind to 2018, Massachusetts was the first state on the East Coast to legalize. And even though it was legal for adult use, it really took until the very, very end of 2018 to get up and running. When I first got into this space, I looked to the West for inspiration to try to figure out what did things look like from a fully functioning and existing market. And what I found was that it was a little bit disjointed. There were brands and retailers who did a great job making things a little bit more normalized, but there was still even within the most normalized places, there were still some differences that at the time I found to be very jarring. Just even going in and having an ID check, sometimes by an armed guard, sometimes I mean, I remember I was somewhere in Colorado that was a great shop once you got inside, but there were bars on the windows and there was an armed guard, and it was such a just disjointed experience. There was also such a nod to so much of the legacy market. And I don't even, not the legacy market, that's the wrong terminology. There was such a nod to a subculture that was it leaned into stereotypes. And I'm not saying all brands, but some of them. But again, looking at this category and seeing a very disjointed expression of what the product was, even across the same form factor. So coming into it from a luxury fashion background, I was a bit surprised that anybody would treat a category this way. From my point of view, when I look at products, I treat them the same way I would want to treat a luxury handbag or a luxury pair of shoes or fine jewelry, or just with the same respect that you would treat something saleable. So it's been a little bit of an evolution. So that's and when I say I'm using the word legacy, but I mean in terms of a branding and positioning point of view. When I first got into the business, I don't think there had been as much thought because there was such a rush to market. And the people in the space were typically people who had a passion for the plant and grew things and didn't necessarily have a background in commercializing products. Now, what I see is there's a lot of business people who have come from different industries and have put some really great thought into products.
Right. So I'm hearing that, back then it was a little more of, I'll call it just traditional cannabis culture or subculture where it was, just people who are really enthusiastic about the plant and probably didn't have that mainstream background or much experience with merchandising or or even retail, quite frankly, right? But now that the industry is more mature and a lot more have come over from the CPG space and from other industries, things have changed. And also people are, my judgment, like there's a greater consideration of the demographics and how brands are positioning themselves. So it's not just all the stereotypes, but there's an appreciation for seniors are using cannabis or soccer moms or whatever, people that might not have been drawn into the traditional like tie-dye lava lamp, whatever kind of aesthetic.
Y- For sure. And also too, when we're rewinding back in time, there was also this moment of if you build it, they will come, and they sure did. So when dispensaries first opened up in pretty much every state where it's a new market, there were lines out the door, around the corner, down the block. And so it didn't matter that something was maybe off brand or maybe not appealing to a consumer, but people would buy it because that's all that was out there. And so I think again, people leaned into what they thought would work. And especially as I see some of the professional services in the industry that have evolved. When I first started looking at marketing agencies in 2018, there were so many people who their presentations very much leaned into the subculture. Everything was green. The word high, HIGH, was in everywhere. There was some note to elevation, or and not to say that a little wink and a nod to that is great. I think it's very appropriate for the product that we have. However, it was everywhere and everything, and I think it was reflective of where we were as an industry. Now, fast forward 2025, most markets have a pretty competitive landscape. So it's gone are the days where you create a product or you build a store and there are lines and just this pent up demand. Now there's a lot more players in the game, and people have to really, because of necessity, be a little bit more sophisticated when they're targeting consumers.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, I wanted to ask you because, Massachusetts 2018 versus 2025, for example, the wholesale prices and, the actual economic dynamics of the product has changed so much. So if you're operating in 2018 versus 2025, the margin of error for, whether you're a brand or retailer or wherever you may be in the supply chain, it's would it be fair to say that it's a completely different ball game now?
Absolutely. The game has changed so much. When dispensaries first opened up in 2018, again, there was the pent-up demand, and the first ones who opened just saw crazy numbers. And those folks, I'd say they probably still to some degree some of them benefit from being a first mover. But when you look at it, let's say there's a municipality that has 8 licenses now. At one time, they might have had 1 license. So, and also they might have been in an area where it was dry in the municipality next door, and now that one has opened up. So there's a lot of market saturation. Also, even particularly Massachusetts, when the market first opened up, they were really servicing consumers from New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and now all those states have opened up around them. So it was almost a perfect storm just seeing the change in that market, because now primarily those dispensaries, with a few exceptions, are servicing Massachusetts consumers, whereas before they were servicing many states. Simultaneously, many more licenses were issued both in retail and in wholesale distribution. So it was almost this perfect storm of saturation from a supply side and then customer attrition due to adjacent states opening up.
Yeah. Wow. So let's shift gears to New York State, where obviously you've been active and operating for the last couple of years now, or a little over a year, right? Since you took the reins at the travel agency's Fifth Avenue store and now the Soho store as well. How's the New York market been going? What's your experience here like? Is it what you expected? Have there been any surprises? How have things changed over the last year or 18 months or so? What are you seeing as you're in it day to day?
Sure, great question. So I've been in the market for a little bit under a year now, which is
Oh,
crazy. But in cannabis time, to be fair, that is probably the equivalent of 2 years in the real world. So, but I have seen the journey progress a bit. So more licenses are opening up just rapidly, and the growth has been quite expansive over the past 12 months. So increasing competition for sure. However, the market still is healthy as of now. I know there are some things that are changing, particularly around marketing and what's permissible in terms of discounting and how you speak to consumers and where you can show up in terms of advertising. So it'll be interesting to see what the final regs look like. But as of now, it is a healthy market. However, we are starting to see little inklings of things popping up that are not permissible under current regulation in terms of discounting and blanketly taking percentages off a whole store. We're starting to see that, and it's interesting even more so because New York is such a large state in comparison, if I'm comparing to Massachusetts, where it's a much smaller state. And the dynamics between downstate and upstate are so different, really just based on population density. So I can speak very much to my personal experience downstate, which is a dense environment, and most retail does, I would say, probably better, again, just because of population and foot traffic, than it would do upstate. So it's an interesting dynamic, and I'm sure for wholesalers, it puts them in a little bit of a position to try to figure out what's that one size almost fits all model that satisfies the whole state enough to a degree that makes enough sense.
so I heard you say a couple of times that the market is healthy, and I'm curious to better understand when you say that, what what are the indicators? What are the metrics, or what is that based on? Like what's the pulse? What's the blood pressure of the market, so to speak?
Sure. So, one indicator that I always look towards is pricing. And so, pricing compression is inevitable, but we are not at a dire place or anywhere near that just yet. There's a lot of things that regulators have put in place that have helped a lot, and I think that the folks who crafted these regs took notice at some of the other markets which we've seen things unfold. For example, one of the regulations is that the same price has to be offered from wholesalers to all retailers, and any kind of high volume discounts need to be blanketly applied. So for example, if you had a dispensary and I had one, there was a grower, they couldn't say, hey, Michael, you get this same product for $5 a unit, and Penelope, you have to pay 10. So folks are not allowed to do that under current regulation, whereas in other states, that's not, I have not seen that anywhere. And that really is helpful from an economic point of view because it does level the playing field. There's also a list that goes out to the OCM of folks who are past due on accounts, and that alerts people to who is good to do business with and who might not be as great to do business with from a receivables standpoint. So that has been tremendously helpful. And as that continues, just having the transparency has been great. I really applaud the state for putting those measures in place. So as of now, that's really helped with the health of the business. The indicators that I see that make things unhealthy, if I saw, let's say, 25 different competing dispensaries putting out these blanket discounts and just behaving in ways that maybe showed a need to get more footsteps through the door by any means that they could, that to me would signal an unhealthy economic environment for the industry.
Got it. I'm curious, given that, I know that the travel agency team and leadership are all very experienced people, and, this was not their first rodeo. So I'm curious if there are any surprises, and in particular with regards to, the consumer base, or like, obviously New York City and where you guys are, your stores are in really, I'll say, uh, popular, like premier locations. And so I'm sure you get a little bit of everyone in there, but I'm curious if there were projections of like, it's going to be such and such people, and then you were surprised to find out it was, what I'm just curious if there's anything you could share on that.
Sure. So personally, no, I'm not surprised. And again, as you mentioned, not our first rodeo with this, but the cannabis consumer typically tends to lean more male, at least this point, and that's something that is true throughout. It's probably a 60-40 or 65-35 split, depending on which market you're in and where exactly you're located. And that I've seen universally hold true. I'd love to crack that code, because what that says to me is that there's a whole group of female consumers that we could unlock, but more on that in a moment. But then also in terms of the other demographics that go into cannabis consumers, many people think, without knowing what the research is, that cannabis consumers are stoners or people who just want to get high all the time and might not necessarily participate as actively in society, at least that stereotype for those of us who are not in the business is what it tends to be. But when you look at the data, it pretty much universally holds true that cannabis consumers are, many of them, the majority of them are white collar employed folks, that about 40% or so have children at home, and they're just people that don't really do things that are different from much of society. They're just people who, for whatever reason, are looking to purchase cannabis. I don't know what the demographic makeup is for alcohol consumers, but I would bet they're probably about the same. And I don't know if you can think of anybody, or probably very few people, even in your social circle and in your life, who have not walked into a liquor store and purchased something within the past few months.
Yeah, great point. Um, So I want to shift gears and ask you about your experience teaching and as part of the faculty at LIM College, and what it's been like for you, and so why don't we start there, and then I have a follow-up question. But yeah, tell us a little about the class you teach, the classes you teach, and what your experience has been like with the students.
Sure. So it's been so rewarding. You kind of never know what to expect when you're walking into a new environment and how people will perceive you and what you're teaching. But what I've found is that the students who have enrolled in my courses have been very enthusiastic and really very much wanted to be there and are appreciative to receive the specialized education around the industry, but with the same disciplines as any business education would give them.
Awesome. And I'm curious, as far as your personal approach to not only teaching, but I know in on your team you have a lot of let's call them junior associates who are newer to the industry, newer in their career. Like, what's your approach to just mentoring and developing people and kind of nurturing that next generation of cannabis leaders?
So a lot of the junior level executives, I think when everybody comes into the space, unless you come in from a professional lens, we come in typically as consumers. That's at least that's how I did. And I remember just thinking, wow, I know a lot of stuff and then coming into the space and then realizing, oh my gosh, I don't know. Like what back then it was like, what is a ratioed product? What is CBN? What does that mean? What are all like these alphabetical things going on here? And then it takes a little while for me at least. It took probably somewhere between 3 to 6 months to fully understand what was going on. And then layered on top of that, working in any regulatory environment requires a bit of a learning curve. But in cannabis, where it's a little bit of a moving target, that can be a challenge. So my approach to junior level executives and people entering the space for the first time is one of patience. And I need to remind myself at times that I'm talking about something, I'm talking about extraction methods or, something that would just probably not make sense to a lot of people. And I forget sometimes. So I try to remain cognizant of the fact that not everybody knows all of the stuff just coming in.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. And that's why I love teaching my intro to cannabis class because I get to constantly review the fundamentals and the stuff that I think sometimes it's easy to take for granted and forget that, oh yeah, not everyone knows this stuff, and even like something that if you're in the industry, of course, the endocannabinoid system, and that's such a huge thing, for example. But if you're, the typical consumer, if there is such a thing, or if you're just someone who's passionate about it, you might have no idea that this thing exists, and even though it's obviously tremendously important. So, um, anyway, I'm glad you've enjoyed the experience, and I know our students have had nothing but great things to say about you. So, thank you for making time to pay it forward and to be one of our excellent faculty members. Where else do you get to learn from the CEO of one of the top performing dispensaries in New York City? It's a opportunity of a lifetime, but I'm biased, so.
No, it's great. It's been really gratifying. And it's with that understanding that not everybody knows everything coming in, particularly in an academic setting. It's so satisfying to see some of the final presentations that come out. And even during the discussions and seeing that the students have really just taken the material, whether it's reading or watching, and absorbed it and can spit it back in such a thoughtful way. I think it really gives them a leg up that they're coming into and to the industry with some knowledge that really you would not have learned unless it was hands-on, but they're getting it before that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I sometimes could be a little jaded about the industry. And so when I get to see them kind of experiencing certain things or learning or discovering certain things for the first time, and like the enthusiasm and excitement around that, it reminds me of myself when I was, green in the space, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is really special to be a part of, and it's really, I'm incredibly fortunate to have gotten into the industry at a young age at the right time, or when I did. And so I don't know, it's been for me, it's had on that level, it's kind of reinvigorated my enthusiasm at times when I've felt sometimes discouraged by the many ups and downs of cannabis. So thanks, students. Penelope, I want to ask you, let me ask you this about a trend in the space in the cannabis industry that either excites you or concerns you.
Sure. So I'm going to go with the excite question. And so it's something I touched on a little bit before in one of your questions was about the makeup of consumers and the fact that we are not servicing from a percentage point of view as many female consumers as we are male consumers. But even regardless of that, one of the big trends that I think would help balance out the scales a bit more is leaning into wellness. And that's something it is such a tough nut to crack because there's so much stigma still, unfortunately, and so many misunderstandings about cannabis, or I shouldn't even say misunderstandings, lack of knowledge about what the plant has to offer and what the various uses are for it. And there's a huge wellness component. And I truly believe that anybody who purchases adult use cannabis, to some degree, they're coming in for treatment, whether they just want to have a great time tonight and they are going to treat themselves to a great time by feeling uplifted, then that's one thing. But there are some people who come in and maybe they're having a little bit of a rough time and want to take the edge off. And maybe they don't really want something heavily intoxicating, but they just want to feel okay or good. So really cannabis to me is a wellness product. And I'm always searching for products that can help exemplify that. The issue becomes from a product development point of view is that those typically aren't the most fast turning products because we haven't unlocked that customer and we haven't really educated the general public on what the plant has to offer. So when I see wellness products and microdose products and things that are approachable to mainstream society, I get really excited. And I'm seeing more and more come through. It's not fast enough for my liking, but when I see them, that really truly excites me.
Nice, awesome. And I'm tempted to ask you about, is there a product that, do you have like a go-to product or favorite product or a brand that you've seen recently that has impressed you, but I don't know if you have to remain neutral on these things as a retailer, so I don't want to put you in a tough spot. So I don't know if that's something you could speak to, or if you'd rather not, that's okay too.
In fairness to all my beloved vendors, I will not answer that comment with a particular answer, but what I will say is that a lot of the wellness products out there, things that typically excite me are microdose products and things that I can control more than I could things that are heavier that I have to cut in half or just use a small amount to take away the ceremony of some of it.
Got it. And let me ask you this. Are there any misconceptions about cannabis or the industry which you'd love to clear up or help close the gap on?
There are so many misconceptions. Where do I start? Well, one that cannabis is a gateway drug, that's so tired, in my opinion. It is so not a gateway drug. I mean, I think for people who are need a gateway to something, or there are many reasons why people start using even stronger forms of medication, whether they're self-medicating or not. I don't know that cannabis is the reason. I think cannabis is just a symptom of a greater problem in some situations. So that's one misconception I'd love to clear up. What else do I want to clear up? That cannabis fries your brain cells, that, your brain on drugs. I don't know if you remember that from when we were children, but that it's not. I think it's something, I think anything can be abused for sure. I don't want to sugarcoat anything, but it's not because it's cannabis. It's because it's a vehicle like anything else. I could abuse apple cider vinegar if I wanted to. You can abuse anything. So I would love to clear up the misconception that some people have that cannabis is, excuse me, this evil drug and devil's lettuce, whatever you want to call it, because it really is a powerful plant that has so much potential to unlock even more than what we even know. I'd love to see more research around it so we could have some hard data that shows what the plant has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes right back to that endocannabinoid system and the education where, I was telling one of my students earlier this week, it's like, there's a couple of hundred cannabinoids in the plant, and we know a decent amount about maybe like 10 of them, and of those 10, like we really only know truly a lot about THC, CBD, maybe a handful of them. So as far as the science of, you know, what this plant is capable of from a therapeutic perspective, we're still in the infancy of understanding there. So, which to me is exciting to know that, maybe a decade or two from now, will almost certainly, my prediction, have some kind of scientific breakthrough or medical breakthrough that comes from our understanding of the plant and the endocannabinoid system and all this great stuff. So, I think there's still plenty to look forward to. See, I'm becoming an optimist again already. This is great.
Love it.
So, Penelope, I want to ask you what what's been the biggest challenge you've encountered in the legal cannabis industry so far?
I'd say the biggest challenge was going through the entire life cycle in the Massachusetts market. I was in there from 2018 to just recent 2024. So that's about 6 years. And so seeing it from its infancy, where it was just an idea that could be um, something that was actually a commercial enterprise, becoming that, and then seeing the huge boom and the excitement around it, and then the market compression and just the changes in it. I think that, looking back, when you're in something, you kind of just roll with it and you don't notice so much. But looking back, that was probably the biggest challenge, because in the cannabis industry in general, the conditions are constantly changing, and to move and pivot. And it's not even just the mind shift that has to go with it. It's the actual tactics and the strategy that can change from one second to the next. And I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge with this industry in general that I don't necessarily foresee changing. But I think that also contributes to all of us who talk about cannabis time, and the reference I said before, 9 months is really a year and a half, and a year is 3 years. And we do so much in such a short period of time with things that are ever changing, that can sometimes be a challenge.
Yeah, certainly. I've experienced that, and it's another one of those things that when you're my experience when you're inside it, you tend to forget. You tend to forget that it's like so volatile, and that in other industries, in most other industries, people don't have that experience where, hey, the rules just changed again for the second time in, however many weeks or months or whatever. So yeah, totally with you on that. So I guess on the flip side, I would ask you, what advice would you offer to someone who's just getting started or just thinking about either working in the industry or maybe investing in the industry or even starting a venture in the industry?
I would say to that person, gather as much information as possible, whether it's firsthand through somebody else. If somebody who wants to work in the business, I would highly recommend that, even if they're a student or they don't have the credentials to do a certain function, go work in a dispensary part-time on weekends, or just really understand it. Because As I mentioned before, even myself coming into the business as a person from the fashion industry, I didn't understand fully the ins and outs of what things were. I didn't know what concentrates were. I had some kind of inkling, but I didn't know how they were processed, what they did, that they were so strong, et cetera, et cetera. And the more you can walk into a business with firsthand experience, I would say that the better off you are, the more valuable you are to your employer or to your investors if you want to start your own business. I would say to folks who are investing, really do due diligence. There are some great investment opportunities out there. There is still growth to be had in the business. It's just cutting through the clutter and figuring out who is capable of pulling off new ventures in this space and who's not.
Yeah, totally. And I'll have to now make my shameless plug for the Cannabis Business Book because I give the same advice. My number one piece of advice is if you're getting into this space, do your homework and really understand not only what you're getting yourself into, but in doing that research, you can figure out what's actually an intelligent and productive path into the space that will set you up for success, which I tell anyone and everyone, if you're getting into this industry, you gotta be in it for the long term and the long haul, and don't think it's just going to be a quick flip or easy money or any of these misconceptions that I think people have around, the green rush or whatnot. It's a grind, it's a marathon, and unless you really know that you love it and you want to be in this space and you're in it for the long haul, as there will still be growing pains for years to come. Um, you know, if you're not ready for that, then probably not the best industry for you. So, with that being said, I want to ask you maybe one more question, which is around the relationship or intersection between fashion and cannabis, because I think this is something that I get asked a lot. And, you have the unique perspective of really operating in both industries at the executive level, at a high level, being successful. And so I'm curious to hear from you what you think that relationship is.
There are so many adjacencies so I guess as where we are now as an industry, there's a lot of adjacencies. So the skills I have in the fashion industry or that I acquired were very transferable. I mean, I don't know if my experience was typical or the same as everybody else's, but I worked in environments that were highly cross-functional and companies who really I'd heard some companies I worked for had said, yeah, cross-functional this, cross-functional that, but I had the fortune of working with places that really took cross-functional working environments to the next level and that were really best in class and that we just accomplished so much because we were so connected. And in cannabis, from the companies that I've worked with, I've seen that the best success comes from that cross collaboration. And we don't, in this ever-changing environment, we don't really have the luxury of being siloed and just this works over here and this works and this just naturally ticks and ties together. And I believe truly that the fashion industry is that way as well, because it's not for the fashion industry in particular, you can't just create a great product and throw it on the hanger and think somebody's going to get your vision. There, in many cases, has to be a runway show that showcases your artwork, and then you have to have a main collection that maybe takes that and puts the message in a more digestible form for many more people, for mass audiences. And cannabis is kind of the same in that realm. There is such an there's such a broad population of artisanal products. There's so many things that they're connoisseur level and just such beautiful expressions of the plant that you have to showcase, because why wouldn't you? You wouldn't be doing justice to the industry. But there are things that not everybody's ready for. When you have the typical consumer that didn't even know that cannabis wasn't just you could only smoke it and it gets you really, really high, it's hard to convey these more elevated products to everybody. So there's, just like in the fashion industry, it's about balance, having the right product assortments that cast a halo effect and that showcase some beautiful pieces, but having enough there to service a broader audience. In terms of skills, the things that I do in my offices that I run, that we approach buying the same way we approach buying in the fashion industry. There is a 101 to this stuff. There's an open to buy. There are disciplines that you put in place. There are KPIs that are exactly the same. So I'd say it's 85 to 90% the same job. It's just, apart from the regulatory issue and the stigma and all that, cut that out of the way, but really understanding a product category, because if you're the merchant for leather goods, you really do need to understand the tanning process and how leather is tumbled and construction techniques on high-end bags. Same as if you're buying men's clothing, you have to understand the difference between a canvas suit and a fused suit and different cuts and this and that. And just like in cannabis, it's the same thing. You have to, if you're buying concentrates, you have to understand the different form factors and how they're processed and solventless versus using gas to extract, et cetera, et cetera.
Awesome. Fantastic. So I know we're coming up on time, so I'm curious if there's anything we haven't covered or touched on that you'd like to share, or so I'll give you the space for that. Or any closing remarks if you have them.
And I don't know if there's anything I feel compelled to touch upon, but I would just say to anybody who's listening and anybody's curious about the space, again, reiterating, do the research, don't get discouraged. If you're passionate about this space, definitely explore it. And if you explore it and you're not, then maybe find something else that you're passionate about, because like you said, Michael, this isn't the green rush is it's a little bit over. There's no free money. Nobody's handing out dollar bills on a corner in the dispensary the way some people thought maybe at one point. And it's a really rewarding industry, but just like anything rewarding, it does require a level of hard work and dedication.
Oh yeah, plenty of it. Well, thank you so much, Penelope. It's a pleasure as always speaking with you. And just in case, tell the folks who might be watching or listening, where they can connect with the travel agency, or what they can expect from the travel agency the rest of this year.
Sure. So the travel agency can be found at thetravelagency.co. There are currently 3 locations: the original location in Union Square at 13th and Broadway, and then downtown Brooklyn, right across the street from Barclays, and then, of course, Fifth Avenue, that is right between 47th and 48th Street, just 2 blocks away from Saks Fifth Avenue. And then in just a few short months, we will be opening up our Soho location, which will be on Broadway at the corner of Houston Street, right next to Target. And we have amazing, fantastic, beautiful things planned for that store. So I highly encourage everybody to follow our webpage and look for some updates. And please visit all of our existing locations, and then certainly come once we open the doors in Soho.
Wow, prime location. I can't wait to see it. I hope I get an invite to that opening.
You absolutely will.
Awesome. Well, Penelope, thank you so very much again. And yeah, everyone who's listening or watching, thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you, Michael.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is.
The Cannabis Business Coach.
Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is. Hi, Mike Z is.
The Cannabis Business Coach.